For months, a small team of scientists had been monitoring Earth's crust in a remote part of the planet. Their instruments were designed to detect seismic activity, shifts in the magnetic field, and any unusual energy patterns that could indicate something hidden deep beneath the surface. Most of the time, the data they received was routine. Small tremors, slight shifts, nothing extraordinary. But then, something unexpected appeared. It started as a faint pulse, barely noticeable at first. It wasn't like the usual rumblings of the Earth, nor did it match the patterns of known seismic activity. It was regular, precise, and incredibly powerful for its size. At first, the scientists assumed it was a glitch in their equipment. But when multiple instruments in different parts of the world picked up the same signal, disbelief turned into fascination. The pulse came from deep underground, far beyond the reach of normal geological formations. One of the researchers, a quiet and thoughtful individual who often worked late into the night, stared at the readings in disbelief. This isn't natural," they muttered under their breath. "Whatever is down there, it's alive in some way." The others exchanged nervous glances. In the lab, the air was tense, but also charged with curiosity. They were witnessing something unprecedented, something that had lain hidden for millions of years. Meanwhile, in government offices far above, the news traveled quickly, but quietly. Intelligence agencies and military leaders were alerted, not for public disclosure, but for preparation. A silent fear spread among them. They didn't know exactly what the pulse meant, but whatever it was, it had the potential to change everything they thought they knew about Earth. They contacted scientists, ordered reports, and even reached out to international counterparts. But the sense of unease lingered far beyond Earth, in the depths of space. Beings from other civilizations had also detected the signal. They didn't broadcast their concern. They didn't make public statements. Instead, their fleets paused in orbit around distant stars. Their communications halted as they attempted to understand the phenomenon. These watchers had seen Earth for centuries. They had cataloged its species, observed its conflicts, and sometimes even influenced its development. And now, for the first time in recorded memory, they were afraid. The reason for their fear was simple. The signal they were picking up matched a record from the oldest archives in the galaxy. Ancient texts and lost logs described a force capable of protecting Earth from any external threat. Some called it a guardian, others a weapon, but all agreed it was something that no invading army could confront without grave consequences. In the quiet of distant command centers, leaders whispered among themselves, debating what to do. "If it awakens," one of them said, "every strategy we've prepared will fail." Back on Earth, the team of scientists had begun organizing an expedition to the pulse's origin. The area where it was strongest was an isolated plateau, surrounded by jagged cliffs and barren land. Reaching it would be difficult, but the scientists felt compelled to see what lay beneath. Each member of the team understood the risk, yet the pull of discovery was stronger than any fear. They prepared their equipment, packed supplies, and discussed every possible scenario, from encountering unknown life forms to triggering geological instability. As they approached the site, the air itself seemed to hum with energy. Birds flew away in sudden bursts, and animals kept their distance, as if sensing something beyond their understanding. The scientists paused, feeling a mix of awe and trepidation. One of them reached out to touch the ground, and a strange vibration ran through their fingertips. It was subtle but undeniable, a faint thrum that resonated deep within the Earth. The pulse was no longer just a reading on a screen. It was something tangible, something real. The first night at the site was restless. Tents were pitched under the stars, but sleep came fitfully. Every so often, the instruments would emit a soft, rhythmic beep, echoing the pulse from below. It was hypnotic, almost calming, yet there was an undercurrent of warning in its rhythm. Around the campfire, the scientists shared theories. Could it be an ancient power source left behind by an unknown civilization? Was it a dormant life form, massive and hidden for eons? Or could it be something beyond their imagination, something older than Earth itself? As dawn broke, the scientists noticed unusual markings on nearby rocks. They weren't natural formations. They were deliberate patterns, geometric and precise. None of the team had ever seen anything like it. Slowly, a chilling thought settled in. The pulse, the markings, the strange energy, they were all connected. It wasn't just a natural phenomenon. Something, or someone, had left these signs intentionally. The news of their discovery leaked subtly to the wider scientific community, but it was kept under strict confidentiality. Rumors began to circulate, and curiosity grew, but no one outside the inner circle truly understood the magnitude of the find. Meanwhile, the galactic observers continued to watch in silence. Their fleets, once casual, now maintained positions ready for immediate response. They had seen the signal before, and they knew the stories. The awakening of the Guardian was not an event to be taken lightly. For the scientists, the reality of what they were facing became more apparent as they descended into a deep cavern revealed by a recent landslide. Inside, the walls were covered with carvings, depicting beings taller than humans, wielding strange powers. They saw images of conflicts between these beings and others from distant stars, battles that no Earth historian had ever recorded. The carvings suggested that Earth had been watched, protected, or even fought over by forces far beyond human comprehension. One of the scientists ran their hand over a carving that depicted a towering figure standing over a city-like structure. "It looks like some kind of guardian," they whispered. "Something built to defend, maybe even to protect." The others nodded, their faces pale but determined. The reality settled over them. Earth was not alone in the universe, and what lay beneath their feet had been waiting silent for millennia. Outside the cavern, the world continued unaware. People went about their lives, oblivious to the cosmic drama unfolding beneath them. Traffic moved, markets opened, children played, Earth carried on, ignorant of the ancient force stirring below. But for the scientists, for the watchers in distant galaxies, and for the very planet itself, nothing would ever be the same. Something monumental was awakening, and the consequences of its emergence would ripple far beyond Earth, shaking the foundations of civilizations across the stars. And in the quiet moments, when the wind swept over the plateau and the stars reflected in the instruments' screens, a subtle vibration could be felt. A pulse that had slept for millions of years was growing stronger, calling attention to itself. The guardian of Earth, long forgotten and buried, had begun to awaken. The galaxy, though silent for now, would not remain so for long. As the mysterious pulse continued to echo from beneath Earth, something remarkable was happening far beyond the planet itself. Across countless light years, advanced civilizations had long been observing humanity. They had watched wars, witnessed the rise and fall of nations, and cataloged species on Earth. But when the pulse reached the edges of the galaxy, a wave of unease spread among those who had been monitoring Earth. In the command centers of distant empires, leaders and scholars studied the signal. It wasn't just a normal anomaly or an energy fluctuation. It had a pattern, a structure, and a resonance that could only mean one thing: the awakening of something ancient and powerful. Many of these beings had long feared this moment. They remembered old legends, stories passed down through generations that spoke of a guardian so formidable that no army, no matter how advanced, could survive its wrath. Some leaders were terrified, while others were skeptical. How could a single force from a tiny blue planet challenge the combined power of civilizations that had spanned galaxies for eons? But deep down, even the skeptics knew better. The records they held were clear. The Guardian of Earth had existed before most of their current empires, and its power was not bound by technology or politics. It was older than many stars, older than most recorded history. Within these civilizations, councils and war rooms were convened. Meetings that would normally take days or weeks were held within hours. Plans were drafted, armadas were placed on standby, and fleets moved into observation positions near Earth. No one dared to make a move that could provoke the unknown force. Every empire knew the stories. The last time the Guardian had appeared, it had ended entire fleets in minutes, leaving no survivors to tell the tale. Meanwhile, back on Earth, humanity continued unaware of the cosmic alarm that had been triggered. News outlets reported minor tremors and unusual energy readings, but nothing about the pulse itself. Scientists on the surface were focused on their research, slowly piecing together the origin of the strange signals. For them, it was a monumental discovery, a mystery to solve, a puzzle buried under millions of years of history. The team working near the remote plateau had begun to notice changes in the environment. Animals avoided the area, winds shifted strangely, and even the weather seemed to respond to something hidden beneath the ground. One night, a small tremor shook the site, not strong enough to cause damage, but enough to make everyone pause. They realized that whatever lay below was not just a machine or a simple formation. It had life, or at least a form of intelligence that could interact with its surroundings. As scientists debated what it could be, a silent signal traveled from Earth into the void of space. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet detectable by those who had been watching for centuries. The signal didn't carry words or images. It carried a presence, a resonance that spoke without language. To those trained to understand such phenomena, it was clear. Something ancient had stirred, and it was aware of the observers watching from afar. Galactic leaders felt a chill. Their spies and sensors had never recorded anything like this. Some fleets tried to communicate with the source, sending messages of peace and diplomacy, hoping to understand its intentions. But there was no response. Not in words, not in light, not in radio waves. Only the pulse continued, growing stronger and more structured. It was as if the Guardian was testing its own awakening, stretching after centuries of rest, assessing the world around it. Back on Earth, the scientists had begun to explore deeper sections of the underground caverns. Walls covered in intricate carvings told stories of battles, victories, and warnings. One panel depicted a massive figure standing before a fleet of enormous ships, its arms raised as if commanding the forces of nature itself. Another showed creatures fleeing from a bright, pulsating energy that seemed to emanate from the Guardian figure. These images, though abstract, were hauntingly clear. Earth had a protector, and it was not a force to be trifled with. The researchers took careful notes, photographing and documenting everything. Each carving, each symbol, seemed to tell a story of preparation, of vigilance, and of ultimate defense. One scientist, running their hands over a depiction of the Guardian, whispered softly, "It wasn't just meant to fight. It was meant to protect everything here." The others nodded, sensing the gravity of their discovery. They were standing on the threshold of something far bigger than themselves, something that would forever change humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. Meanwhile, the distant civilizations continued their quiet panic. Orders were given to pause all exploratory missions near Earth. War councils debated retreat and diplomacy, unsure how to proceed. No one wanted to provoke the unknown force, yet none could fully understand what it wanted or why it had remained dormant for so long. Ancient texts were consulted, and historians pored over myths and old records. Some compared the Guardian to mythical figures from their own worlds, noting uncanny similarities in design, function, and purpose. Back on Earth, the human scientists began to notice small signs of change in the energy readings. The pulse had shifted slightly, almost like a heartbeat. It wasn't chaotic. It had rhythm, a pattern that suggested consciousness. One researcher, studying the data late into the night, said quietly, "It's learning." Or maybe it's waking up. The others looked at each other, realizing that whatever they were witnessing was not a static phenomenon. It was alive, aware, and possibly preparing for something humanity could not yet comprehend. The idea that Earth had a guardian and entity of immense power lying dormant beneath the surface was difficult to accept. Even the scientists, who were trained to approach phenomena logically, struggled to reconcile their observations with reality. Yet the carvings, the pulse, and the sudden environmental shifts left little room for doubt. Something monumental had begun, and the planet itself seemed to respond to it. As the days passed, the pulse grew stronger, spreading subtly across the globe. Instruments recorded unusual electromagnetic activity. Satellites detected anomalies in the upper atmosphere, and even wildlife seemed unsettled. People in nearby towns reported strange dreams, a sense of being watched, and an unshakable feeling of awe mixed with fear. Scientists debated whether these were natural responses or something more profound. They could not yet imagine the full scale of what they were dealing with. Meanwhile, in the deepest reaches of space, fleets of watchers held their positions. Observatories and satellites scanned every inch of Earth, waiting for signs of aggression, communication, or awakening. Communication lines were kept open between empires, but no one dared to suggest direct intervention. The records were clear. The last civilizations that underestimated the Guardian did not survive. Every leader, even the most aggressive, recognized that discretion was essential. Back on Earth, the team of scientists decided to explore further into the underground labyrinth. Some passages were narrow and dangerous. Others opened into vast chambers that seemed almost endless. Each chamber was more elaborate than the last, filled with carvings, strange artifacts, and a faint hum of energy that seemed to follow them. One chamber in particular drew their attention. It was enormous, almost cathedral-like, with a floor that glowed faintly as if powered by some ancient force. Symbols on the walls pulsed in rhythm with the underground heartbeat, creating a feeling of connection with something larger than themselves. The scientists could feel it. They were not alone, and whatever lay beneath the earth was beginning to acknowledge their presence. It was not hostile, at least not yet, but it was aware. Every step they took seemed to echo in harmony with the pulse, creating a sensation of walking alongside a giant ancient consciousness. The weight of history pressed down on them, yet they moved forward, driven by curiosity, duty, and a deep sense of awe. And while humanity slept, unknowing, the galaxy held its collective breath. Distant empires remained on silent alert, their fleets poised and waiting. Some sent scholars and observers to study from afar, trying to understand the nature of the Guardian and its intentions. Others debated whether to send messages of peace or simply retreat. All were united by one understanding. Earth was no longer a simple, unprotected world. It had a guardian, and that guardian had begun to stir. The story of the pulse, the carvings, and the awakening guardian was just beginning. Humanity, for now, remained unaware of the cosmic significance of these events. But in the quiet of underground chambers, beneath the glow of strange symbols, the scientists felt the first undeniable truth. Earth was alive in ways they had never imagined, and something ancient and powerful was awakening to protect it. The universe, silent as it had been for eons, had noticed. The galaxy, once indifferent to a small blue planet, now watched in fear and awe. Something monumental was happening, and the consequences would ripple across space and time. For Earth, for humanity, and for the watchers of distant worlds. Nothing would ever be the same. The Guardian was waking, and the galaxy had begun to quiver in silence. By the time the pulse from deep within Earth had reached its peak strength, the team of scientists had begun to realize just how significant their discovery was. They had spent weeks documenting carvings, studying energy readings, and exploring the cavernous labyrinths beneath the planet. Every day brought new surprises. Chambers larger than any cathedral, walls covered with intricate symbols, and strange artifacts that seemed impossibly ancient. Yet despite all this, the true magnitude of what lay beneath was still hidden from them. Above the surface, life continued as normal, or at least what humans considered normal. Cities bustled, vehicles moved along busy streets, children played in open fields, and people went about their daily routines, completely unaware that beneath their feet something extraordinary was stirring. The pulse, while powerful, was subtle enough to go unnoticed by ordinary instruments or the human senses. But for those who had dedicated their lives to science, it was impossible to ignore. The team noticed patterns in the carvings that were impossible to interpret fully at first. They depicted beings that were massive, far larger than any human, interacting with strange objects that seemed to float or move on their own. Some carvings illustrated what looked like energy fields enveloping the figures, almost as if they were protected or empowered by some unknown force. Other images showed scenes of conflict, massive ships falling from the sky, alien creatures fleeing in terror, and cities being shielded by a towering presence. One thing was clear: whatever had been created beneath Earth was not a simple machine. It was designed with purpose, intelligence, and unmatched power. Late one night, as the team reviewed their notes by the dim light of portable lamps, one researcher noticed something unusual on the sensors. The pulse was no longer static. It had begun to shift rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. It wasn't violent or chaotic. It was deliberate, measured, and alive in a way that suggested awareness. The researcher's voice trembled slightly as they spoke. "It's reacting. It knows we're here." The others turned to look, and a hush fell over the group. None of them had expected this. They had thought they were merely observing, documenting, and analyzing a natural phenomenon or an ancient artifact. But now it was clear that whatever lay beneath the ground had a consciousness of its own, and it had taken notice of them not far beyond Earth. The reaction of other civilizations was becoming more intense. Observers stationed in the outskirts of the galaxy reported abnormal fluctuations in the cosmic energy readings. Entire fleets had stopped moving, and commanders debated in urgent silence. Some suggested sending communication attempts, while others advocated for retreat, fearing the worst. Ancient records described the Guardian of Earth as unstoppable once awakened. Entire worlds had been destroyed in the past when civilizations had misjudged it. Now, even those far from the planet were unsure how to respond. Back on Earth, the scientists continued their exploration. One particular chamber drew their attention more than any other. It was enormous, stretching beyond the reach of their lights. In its center lay a massive pedestal, carved from stone but pulsing faintly with energy. The carvings around it depicted a figure kneeling over the pedestal, its hands placed as if channeling some immense power. Symbols on the walls appeared to respond to the pulse, glowing in sequence, creating patterns that seemed almost alive. The researchers felt a mix of fear and awe. None of them had ever encountered anything like this. One of them, carefully tracing the carvings with gloved hands, whispered, This is a map, a guide. It's showing us something, but what exactly?" The others nodded, equally fascinated and cautious. They could feel that they were standing on the edge of something monumental, something that could redefine humanity's understanding of the planet itself. As they delved deeper, strange phenomena began to manifest around them. The air felt charged, like the moments before a storm. Small objects on the ground would vibrate, seemingly in tune with the pulse. Occasionally, shadows flickered across the walls, though no one could see a source. The scientists debated whether this was a trick of the light or the manifestation of some unknown energy. Either way, it was clear. The guardian beneath Earth was no longer dormant in any sense. It was beginning to assert its presence. Above ground, even the environment seemed affected. Local wildlife behaved unusually. Birds avoided the area entirely. Herds of animals moved away from the plateau, and fish in nearby rivers acted restless. Weather patterns began to shift in subtle ways, with sudden gusts of wind or brief electrical discharges in the atmosphere that could not be explained by ordinary science. All of this went unnoticed by the public, but the researchers documented it carefully, knowing that every detail might hold a key to understanding the force they had awoken. Meanwhile, in the far reaches of space, galactic civilizations debated the best course of action. Communication channels remained open between allied empires, but all were wary of direct intervention. A common agreement emerged: do not provoke the Guardian. Do not approach Earth. Observe only. Many fleets repositioned themselves, keeping a safe distance, their commanders aware that the slightest aggressive move could provoke a response beyond imagination. On Earth, the scientists had begun to experience a more personal effect from the pulse. It was subtle, at first a lingering sense of being watched, a shiver down the spine, the feeling that the planet itself was alive and aware of their presence. Dreams became vivid and strange, filled with towering figures, celestial battles, an energy that seemed to hum in rhythm with the underground pulse. One researcher shared their dream aloud. I saw a giant standing over Earth, and it was waiting, watching, protecting. Others nodded quietly, understanding what was being implied. The guardian beneath Earth was not just a myth or a story. It was real. It was alive, and it was aware of the people exploring its chambers. The weight of that realization pressed on them. They were not merely explorers or scientists anymore. They were witnesses to something that had not been seen in millions of years. The pulse continued to grow stronger, spreading not just through the Earth, but subtly into space. Instruments picked up faint disturbances in the upper atmosphere, and satellites recorded irregular energy fields. Even those trained in space observation noted that these fluctuations were not natural. The Guardian's influence was expanding, and the galaxy was beginning to take notice. In the underground chambers, the team discovered more carvings depicting scenes of visitors from other worlds. Ships appeared to approach Earth, and the Guardian was shown standing before them, arms raised in warning or protection. The scenes were both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The Guardian did not attack recklessly. It responded deliberately, decisively, and with overwhelming power. The scientists realized that this being was not a weapon for war alone. It was a protector, an ancient entity created to safeguard the planet against any threat. No matter how large or technologically advanced. As days passed, the researchers continued to uncover more signs of the Guardian's capabilities. Some carvings hinted at energy manipulation, possibly even the ability to control natural forces. Others depicted protective barriers that could shield entire cities or regions from attack. The more they discovered, the clearer it became. Earth had been guarded for millennia by a force beyond comprehension. And now, for the first time in countless ages, it was beginning to awaken. Despite their fear, the scientists felt a growing sense of responsibility. They knew that they were among the few who understood the true significance of what was happening. Humanity was unaware of the Guardian's existence, and the galaxy was watching silently, waiting for signs of its next move. The researchers documented everything meticulously, hoping that their work would one day serve as a record for understanding, communication, or even warning. Night after night, the pulse continued to beat, steady and rhythmic, like a living heart beneath the surface. It seemed to respond to the presence of life, the activity of the scientists, and perhaps even the distant watchers in space. The Guardian was alive, aware, and preparing for the next stage of its awakening. The world above remained oblivious, but the events unfolding beneath the surface were historic, unparalleled, and potentially world-changing. The Guardian's presence was no longer confined to myth or legend. It had begun to make itself known, subtly but unmistakably. Those who had seen its carvings, felt its pulse, and experienced its influence were changed forever. A silent understanding emerged among the team. Earth was not alone, never had been, and never would be. Something ancient and powerful had been waiting, protecting the planet, and now it was stirring once again. The galaxy, far away and silent, remained on edge. Fleets and empires watched, debated, and waited. No one knew what the Guardian would do next, or when it would fully reveal itself. But one thing was certain: the universe would never look at Earth the same way again. For the scientists exploring the underground labyrinth, the sense of awe, fear, and wonder was overwhelming. They were not only uncovering the history of their planet, but also witnessing the early signs of a force that had slept for eons and was beginning to awaken. Humanity had no idea what was coming. The galaxy, once indifferent, had begun to quake in silence. And beneath it all, deep within the heart of Earth, the Guardian continued. By now, the pulse from deep beneath Earth had grown strong enough to be impossible to ignore. The team of scientists had spent weeks exploring the underground labyrinth, documenting carvings, artifacts, and energy readings that defied explanation. Every day brought new revelations, but nothing could have prepared them for what happened next. It began subtly at first. Instruments that had been stable for weeks started recording fluctuations that were far beyond anything natural. A low hum filled the chambers, vibrating through the floor and walls. The scientists paused, exchanging uneasy glances. It was as if the ground itself was waking, stretching after a long sleep. The air felt heavier, charged with an energy that was both terrifying and beautiful. Then came the first tremor. Not strong enough to collapse the cavern, but strong enough to make everyone stop in their tracks. Dust fell from the ceiling, small rocks tumbled across the floor, and a faint, rhythmic vibration echoed through the labyrinth. The pulse, which had been a distant hum until now, became a physical presence. It was as if the Guardian beneath Earth had shifted slightly in its long slumber, testing its power and presence in the world above. Outside, the environment began to change. Birds scattered in chaotic flocks, animals fled the plateau, and the wind itself seemed to move with purpose, carrying an electric charge that made hair stand on end. Locals who lived far from the research site reported unusual lights in the sky and strange atmospheric disturbances. Few understood what was happening, but the sense of unease spread quietly. Nature itself seemed to respond to the Guardian's awakening. Within the caverns, the scientists could feel the Guardian's presence more strongly than ever. Shadows flickered in the corners of the chambers, though there was no clear source of light. Small objects vibrated, moving slightly as if nudged by some invisible force. One of the researchers placed a hand on the glowing pedestal at the center of the main chamber and felt a sudden, powerful surge of energy run through their body. It was brief, not harmful, but it left a mark on their mind, a sense of connection to something far older and far greater than themselves. It's alive, one of the scientists whispered. Not just a machine, not just energy. Something alive, aware, and immense. The others nodded silently, their faces pale but filled with awe. They had suspected it before, but now there was no doubt. Whatever lay beneath Earth was not just dormant, it had begun to awaken. Its consciousness had started interacting with the world, with them, and perhaps even with the distant watchers observing from space that far above the Earth. The pulse's growth had reached a point where it could no longer be ignored by satellites and space stations. Scientists monitoring the planet from orbit noted unusual energy readings and subtle atmospheric anomalies. Even the instruments used for global observation began to malfunction under the Guardian's influence, detecting energy patterns that did not match any known natural or artificial source. Some satellites recorded sudden flashes of light beneath the surface, though clouds and terrain made direct observation impossible. Meanwhile, distant civilizations across the galaxy reacted with growing alarm. Fleets that had been observing from afar began to reposition themselves, keeping a cautious distance. Commanders debated the meaning of the sudden surge of energy. Some argued it was a test, a warning, or a defensive measure. Others feared it was the beginning of an attack. Every empire, whether advanced or ancient, understood one thing clearly: the Guardian of Earth had begun to awaken, and its power was beyond anything they had encountered in living memory back in the caverns. The scientists discovered new chambers that had previously been hidden. One room in particular stood out. It was enormous, stretching beyond the reach of their lights, with walls that seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as the Guardian's heartbeat. Symbols on the walls glowed faintly, and the floor radiated a subtle warmth. In the center of the chamber lay a massive structure, part pedestal, part mechanism, and part living entity. It seemed to breathe in sync with the pulse, as though it were the very heart of the Guardian itself. The researchers were cautious, but compelled to explore. Every step they took felt significant, as if they were walking in harmony with a being far older than humanity. They noticed patterns in the glowing symbols that appeared to respond to their presence. Sometimes the lights would brighten, other times they would dim, almost like the Guardian was observing them, acknowledging their curiosity, but warning them to be careful. Outside the underground labyrinth, the Earth itself seemed to react. Small earthquakes occurred in distant regions, far from the research site. Weather patterns shifted unpredictably, with storms forming and dissipating suddenly. Animals displayed behaviors that were erratic and cautious, as if sensing an intelligence far beyond their understanding. Humans, for the most part, remained unaware of the cause, attributing the events to natural anomalies or freak occurrences. A team of scientists continued documenting every detail. They knew that whatever they were witnessing was unprecedented, but they also understood the need for caution. One misstep could provoke a response from the Guardian that humanity might not be ready for. They worked methodically, recording the energy fluctuations, mapping the carvings, and noting the reactions of the environment. One night, while the team rested near the glowing pedestal, a new phenomenon occurred. The pulse intensified, creating a visible vibration through the chamber. Dust and small stones lifted slightly from the ground, hovering for a brief moment before settling again. The air shimmered with a faint light, and the hum of energy became almost audible, like a low, resonant voice speaking directly to the mind. The scientists were frozen in awe, realizing that the Guardian was beginning to communicate, not with words, but with presence and energy. At the same time, the distant watchers in space noted a remarkable change. The Guardian's energy had reached a level detectable across light years. The pulse carried information, patterns, and warnings that advanced civilizations could not fully decode, but they recognized the intent. The Guardian was aware, prepared, and watching. No fleet, no weapon, and no strategy could challenge it without immense risk. For the first time in millennia, they understood the gravity of their previous records. The Guardian of Earth was no myth. It was real, and it had begun its emergence. Back on the surface, human technology began to register anomalies in subtle ways. Power grids flickered, satellites lost brief contact, and navigation systems experienced unexplained interference. These events were minor in the grand scale, but they hinted at a larger force influencing the planet. Even those who had never believed in anything beyond earthly science could not deny the strange occurrences. Something extraordinary was unfolding beneath the ground, and humanity was on the brink of discovering it. Within the underground chambers, the scientists discovered evidence of previous awakenings. or perhaps attempts at communication by the Guardian in the distant past. Symbols indicated that other civilizations had once approached Earth, and the Guardian had either warned them or repelled them. The carving suggested that the Guardian did not act recklessly. It responded only when necessary, always with purpose and precision. This reinforced the understanding that the Guardian was a protector, designed to defend Earth from threats far greater than humanity could imagine. The pulse continued to strengthen, resonating through the caverns and subtly affecting the world above. The scientists felt the presence more keenly with each passing day, sensing a growing intelligence and awareness. It was not malevolent, at least not yet. It was deliberate, watchful, and infinitely powerful. Every movement of the team, every action above or below ground, seemed to be observed, measured, and understood as the days turned into weeks. It became evident that the Guardian was preparing for something. The tremors became more coordinated, the energy readings more structured, and the reactions of nature increasingly pronounced. Birds, animals, and even the winds appeared to follow patterns in harmony with the pulse. The scientists began to understand that Earth itself was connected to this force. It was as if the planet were a living system, and the Guardian was its heart. Awakening after eons of rest. Meanwhile, the distant watchers in space continued their silent vigilance. Entire fleets were repositioned to maintain observation without provoking the Guardian. Scholars, historians, and strategists pored over ancient records, trying to understand the patterns and predict the Guardian's next move. Every civilization that had studied Earth for centuries now understood a single, undeniable truth: the Guardian was awake, and the balance of power in the galaxy could be altered by its emergence. In the underground chambers, the scientists felt a profound mix of fear and reverence. They were witnessing the awakening of a being whose existence had shaped the course of history long before humans had emerged. The Guardian was alive, intelligent, and powerful beyond comprehension. It was not a weapon of war, but a force of protection designed to defend Earth from any threat, no matter how large or technologically advanced. And as the pulse resonated through the planet, the scientists realized one final truth: humanity had been unaware of this force for millennia. And now, for the first time in recorded history, they were standing at the threshold of understanding. The Guardian of Earth was awake. The Guardian's presence beneath Earth had grown impossible to ignore. What had begun as a subtle pulse, almost like a heartbeat, had now become a tangible, undeniable force that affected the planet itself. The team of scientists, who had been exploring underground chambers for weeks, began to notice changes not just in the caverns, but in the world above. Small tremors became more frequent and coordinated. It was no longer random. The ground seemed to move with intention. Rivers shifted subtly in their paths. Winds carried patterns that could almost be read like a language. And even the climate showed slight fluctuations in sync with the Guardian's rhythm. The scientists documented everything carefully, realizing that they were witnessing the Guardian interacting with the planet itself. What we're seeing, it's not just beneath us, one of the researchers said quietly. It's affecting the world above. It's alive, and it's aware. The others nodded, silent, sensing the magnitude of the truth. They had suspected the Guardian was intelligent, but now they could feel its awareness extending beyond the underground chambers. It was as if the planet itself had a pulse, and the Guardian was its heart, growing stronger with every passing hour. Meanwhile, distant civilizations in space could detect the Guardian's influence as well. Energy readings from Earth had reached a level that was impossible to ignore. Fleets stationed across the galaxy reported that the fluctuations were no longer localized. They were spreading subtly through space, creating patterns that advanced sensors could detect and analyze. For the first time, observers realized that the Guardian was not only awakening, but also projecting its presence outward, sending a clear signal: Earth is protected, and any threat will be noticed. The response among galactic civilizations was cautious, tense, and filled with respect. Fleets repositioned themselves, warships slowed, and many leaders ordered a temporary halt to all aggressive plans. Even the most warlike empires understood that direct confrontation with the Guardian would be catastrophic. Legends and records warned of its unmatched power, but now, seeing the early signs of its awakening, fear turned into action. Every fleet maintained distance, every ship remained in orbit at a safe remove, and every civilization prepared for the possibility that the Guardian might act in defense of its planet. Back on Earth, the scientists noticed something remarkable. The Guardian's pulse had begun to interact with the carvings and symbols they had documented in earlier chambers. Patterns on the walls began to glow in response to its movements, and faint vibrations ran along the floor as if the Guardian was communicating. Though no words were spoken, the scientists felt a connection. They realized that the Guardian was aware of them, observing their intentions, and perhaps testing their understanding. Some of the carvings depicted scenes of previous awakenings, showing how the Guardian had responded to threats from other civilizations. Massive ships were stopped without a single weapon fired. Armadas that had approached Earth too aggressively were driven away, not through destruction alone, but by an overwhelming display of power that left no doubt about the Guardian's capabilities. The researchers realized that they were witnessing history repeating itself. But this time, humanity was at the center. The Guardian's influence was not violent, at least not yet. Instead, it was deliberate, precise, and measured. Animals nearby behaved as if sensing a protector. Birds circled high above, avoiding the plateau where the pulse originated. Rivers and winds seemed to flow with intent, moving in ways that mirrored the Guardian's rhythm. It was as if Earth itself had become part of a larger organism, with the Guardian serving as its conscious center. One night, the scientists witnessed something extraordinary. The energy patterns on the walls of the largest chamber intensified, casting a glow that illuminated the cavern like a sun trapped underground. Dust swirled in the air, small stones lifted slightly from the ground, and a low hum resonated through every bone in their bodies. It was a presence massive, intelligent, and alive. The Guardian was no longer confined to the depths. It was reaching upward, outward, communicating with the world, and perhaps even signaling to those who watched from space. The team felt both awe and fear. They were the first humans to witness this force in action, and they realized that the Guardian's awakening was not a mere scientific event. It was a turning point in the history of their planet. For millennia, humanity had lived in ignorance of the immense power that slept beneath their feet. Now, the Guardian had begun to show its presence, subtly but unmistakably, reminding all who watched that Earth was defended above ground. Subtle signs of the Guardian's influence became noticeable. Satellites experienced minor disturbances. Communication systems and navigation devices occasionally failed for brief moments, as if the planet itself was testing technology. Local wildlife acted strangely, avoiding areas that were once familiar. Even humans, though unaware of the cause, sensed something unusual, a faint tension in the air, a collective feeling that something monumental was happening. Just out of sight. The Guardian's presence was not just defensive, it was observational. It scanned the world, measuring activity, monitoring potential threats, and assessing the readiness of humanity. The team of scientists began to understand that they were witnessing an entity capable of incredible intelligence and discernment. It did not act without reason, but it responded decisively when necessary. Every tremor, every pulse, every subtle change in the environment was evidence of a consciousness far beyond human comprehension. Distant civilizations continued to monitor Earth cautiously. Ships that had once planned exploratory missions near the planet remained in orbit at safe distances. Observers documented the energy fluctuations, trying to decipher patterns, but they could not fully understand the scale or intent of the Guardian's actions. What was clear was that the being beneath Earth had begun to assert its authority, not with aggression, but with an undeniable presence that could not be ignored. In the underground chambers, the team discovered new carvings that illustrated the Guardian interacting with visitors from other worlds. Ships approached Earth, curious or aggressive, and the Guardian responded. Sometimes it raised barriers of energy. Sometimes it emitted waves of force that repelled intruders without direct confrontation. The message was always the same: Earth is protected. Do not threaten it. The realization hit the scientists hard. Humanity was not alone, and Earth had never been vulnerable. The Guardian had existed long before humans, silently protecting the planet and observing any who might pose a threat. Its awakening was not a disaster. It was a reminder that the world had been safeguarded for millennia. Yet, the scale of its power was overwhelming. Humans had never faced anything like this, and the implications for the future were enormous. Despite their fear, the researchers continued their work, documenting every reaction, every vibration, every pulse. They understood that this knowledge could shape the future of humanity. If the Guardian's presence became public, the world would change overnight. Nations would reevaluate their priorities. Military strategies would become irrelevant. And the understanding of Earth's place in the universe would be forever altered. As the pulse intensified, subtle changes in the environment signaled the Guardian's growing awareness of threats beyond the planet. Satellites, distant ships, and cosmic instruments recorded faint but undeniable signs that the Guardian could sense potential dangers from across the galaxy. Empires that had once ignored Earth were now on high alert. Fleets remained distant, no one daring to approach. And every civilization understood the same fact: the Guardian was awake, alert, and prepared to act if necessary. In the chambers, the scientists experienced a profound moment. A faint vibration coursed through the floor, walls, and ceiling, synchronizing with the energy of the symbols and carvings. The sensation was almost like a heartbeat, steady and deliberate. One researcher whispered, "It's telling us. It knows we're here. It's aware of us, but it's not angry yet." The others nodded, recognizing the gravity of their discovery. They were not only observing a force beyond comprehension, they were interacting with it. Every action, every movement, every decision they made could influence how the Guardian perceived humanity. The realization was humbling, frightening, and awe-inspiring all at once. Meanwhile, the galaxy held its breath. Empires that had once planned aggressive expansion paused. Scholars debated what this awakening meant, and leaders reconsidered strategies that might have involved Earth. Fleets moved cautiously, avoiding the planet, as though feeling the weight of an unseen authority. The Guardian was no longer hidden. Its presence was undeniable, its power unchallenged, and its purpose unmistakable. Earth was under protection, and the universe would soon learn to respect it. The scientists, standing in the largest chamber, felt the energy intensify once again. The pulse was now strong enough to resonate through their entire bodies. It was as if the Guardian itself was acknowledging their efforts, understanding their curiosity, and warning them of the responsibility they now carried. Humanity, though unaware, had been chosen to witness a moment of history, the awakening of a being older than civilization itself, the protector of an entire planet. And as the pulse continued to spread, subtle but undeniable, one thing became clear: the Guardian had begged. The Guardian had been stirring for weeks, its pulse growing stronger, its awareness expanding, and its presence felt not just beneath the Earth, but across the planet and even into space. What had started as subtle vibrations had now become undeniable signs that something immense, ancient, and intelligent was fully awake. Above the surface, humans were starting to notice unusual events. though most did not understand their significance. Minor earthquakes shook distant regions, strange patterns appeared in the skies, and communication systems experienced intermittent failures. Wildlife behaved strangely. Birds circled the edges of the plateau without landing. Animals fled areas that had long been familiar, and even the oceans seemed restless, waves forming in irregular patterns. People felt a sense of unease, an instinctive feeling that something was happening on a scale far beyond human understanding. The team of scientists, who had been exploring the underground chambers since the first pulse, realized they were witnessing history. They had seen carvings and symbols depicting previous awakenings of the Guardian, but now it was happening before their eyes. The pulse of energy, like a heartbeat, resonated through the caverns and the planet itself. The symbols and carvings on the walls glowed, responding to the Guardian's presence, as if the ancient protector were acknowledging them. The scientists felt a strange mixture of fear and awe. They knew they were insignificant in the grand scale of the Guardian's existence, yet they had a role in understanding and documenting it. Every tremor, every flicker of light, every subtle movement seemed to communicate something, though they could not fully comprehend the language of the Guardian. They could feel its intelligence, its awareness, and its power, and they knew the world above had no idea what was unfolding beneath their feet as the pulse grew stronger. Environmental changes became more pronounced. Storms formed suddenly, following patterns that mimicked the rhythms from below. Mountains subtly shifted, though not destructively, as if the earth itself were responding to the Guardian's awakening. The plateau where the scientists worked became a hub of activity, as if the land itself were alive and attuned to the Guardian's energy. The air felt charged, almost electric, carrying a subtle hum that resonated deep within the bones far above the planet. Satellites and observation stations recorded extraordinary anomalies. Energy fields shifted in ways that defied understanding. Minor fluctuations in gravity and electromagnetic fields were detected. Even distant civilizations in space began to notice these changes. Fleets that had been stationed at a safe distance held position, awed and cautious. The Guardian was no longer hidden. Its presence was impossible to ignore, and the galaxy had begun to take it seriously. For many of these distant watchers, this awakening was a reminder of the ancient records they had studied for centuries. The Guardian of Earth had existed before most known civilizations, a protector designed to prevent any external force from threatening the planet. Legends described its incredible power, and historical accounts noted the destruction of intruding fleets. Now, seeing the early signs of its awakening, even the most skeptical leaders understood that Earth had a force they could not challenge. The scientists ventured deeper into the largest chamber beneath the plateau. The glowing pedestal in the center, which had pulsed faintly for weeks, now radiated a powerful energy. The symbols on the walls shimmered in response, illuminating the cavern in a soft golden light. Dust floated gently in the air, as though suspended by an invisible force. The Guardian's pulse resonated in harmony with the chamber, and the scientists could feel its presence as if standing in the heart of a living being. "It's fully awake now," one of the researchers whispered. "It knows we're here, and it's aware of the world above. I can feel it." The others nodded silently, understanding the gravity of the moment. They had studied the energy patterns, observed the carvings, and documented the pulse, but now they felt a direct connection to the Guardian. It was as if the planet itself had a consciousness, with the Guardian as its heart, awake and aware, ready to act in defense of its world. Outside, subtle signs of the Guardian's influence continued to manifest. Oceans moved in unusual patterns, winds shifted with intention, and electrical storms sparked unpredictably. Birds avoided the plateau entirely, and land animals fled from areas that had long been safe. Even humans began to notice strange occurrences, though few could understand them. A collective instinctive awareness spread. A feeling that the world was alive in ways never before realized. The Guardian's awakening also reached beyond Earth, across the galaxy. Distant civilizations observed the energy patterns expanding outward. Ships that had once considered approaching the planet for exploration or conquest paused. Fleets remained distant, sensing the intelligence and power emanating from the Guardian. Scholars and strategists pored over ancient records, trying to interpret the meaning of the phenomena. But even the most advanced minds struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what was unfolding. As the days passed, the Guardian's presence became more interactive. Small tremors aligned with environmental changes, as if signaling messages. Rivers shifted subtly, and winds carried patterns that seemed deliberate. The symbols on the cavern walls pulsed in sequence, communicating energy that the scientists could feel, but not yet understand fully. It was not hostile, at least not yet, but it was deliberate, measured, and purposeful. The team realized that the Guardian was aware not only of them, but also of potential threats beyond the planet. The energy waves traveling through the atmosphere and space could detect disturbances, projecting a silent warning to any observers or approaching civilizations. It was a force of protection, capable of assessing threats, responding intelligently, and ensuring the safety of Earth. For humanity, the implications were profound, though still largely hidden. The Guardian's awakening meant that the planet was no longer vulnerable to external threats. Any aggressive move from a distant civilization would be met with overwhelming power. Yet humans, unaware of the scale and nature of this force, continued their lives, oblivious to the invisible shield that now enveloped their world. The scientists, however, understood their responsibility. They were witnesses to history, documenting the awakening of a being whose existence predated all known civilizations. They realized that their work could shape humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. Every observation, every recording, and every note could one day serve as a guide for understanding the Guardian, its purpose, and its incredible power. Late one night, the pulse intensified dramatically. The golden glow in the cavern expanded, filling every chamber and illuminating carvings in unprecedented detail. Dust and small stones floated as if suspended by an invisible hand. The air vibrated with energy that resonated through the scientists' bodies. The Guardian had reached a level of awakening where its presence was undeniable. Its intelligence, awareness, and power were now fully manifest, and its influence extended not only through the planet, but across space itself. The researchers felt awe and humility. They were insignificant compared to the Guardian, yet they were fortunate to witness it. The realization dawned that Earth had never been alone, and humanity's existence had been quietly safeguarded by this ancient force. The Guardian's awakening was a reminder that the planet itself had an intelligence far beyond human comprehension, and that life on Earth was protected by something extraordinary. In space, distant observers documented every energy spike, fluctuation, and anomaly. Entire fleets repositioned to avoid provoking the Guardian, while scholars debated the implications of its awakening. The galaxy, once indifferent to Earth, now recognized the planet as defended by a force beyond measure. Empires reconsidered expansion plans, strategies, and intentions, understanding that any threat to Earth would be met with overwhelming response. Within the underground chambers, the pulse continued to resonate. The Guardian's presence was now palpable, a living force that seemed to breathe with the planet. The scientists felt a connection, subtle but undeniable, as if the Guardian were acknowledging their role as witnesses. Its awakening was not just a natural event, it was a declaration of protection, a signal that Earth's life and civilizations were under its watchful care. And then came the moment that would mark history. The Guardian's energy surged, sending vibrations throughout the planet. Trees swayed in unison, rivers shifted their paths slightly, and even the clouds above moved with purpose. It was as if the planet itself had taken a deep, conscious breath. The pulse had become a statement. Earth is defended, humanity is protected, and the galaxy will bear witness to this power. The scientists, standing in the illuminated cavern, understood the significance. They were witnessing the full awakening of a being older than time, a force that had existed before humans, before stars, and had now chosen to reveal itself in response to a world ready for protection. The Guardian's presence was not destructive, but deliberate, intelligent, and purposeful. Its role was clear: safeguard the planet and its life from threats. Near and far beyond Earth, the galaxy watched silently. Empires understood that confrontation was impossible without risk. Scholars studied every anomaly, every pulse, and every shift in the environment, trying to decode the Guardian's eye.